Episode 37 of the Geekdom101 podcast. Another pretty adult, mature discussion here. I was joined by Adonis Xavier from Appsolutely Geek'd. The original air date was June 30th, 2020. It's basically a two-part special edition. This is part one, where we discuss the topic of covert racism in America following the events of what happened in the summer of 2020. Now, this was obviously in the early times of the Black Lives Matter movement. Not so much the organization, which is very controversial, and a lot of people have sort of been critical of the way the organization has behaved, but more so the movement behind this sort of covert racism, the racism with certain law enforcement officers and things like that. We discuss that, and then we go into the secret racism of the media and the education system. It's a really, really good topic, and it's something that it's covert, like I said. You don't really see it until you open up that third eye. And I don't mean like TN, I mean like that mental third eye where you start to realize how the world really works. I'm not one of those guys that likes to get sucked up in mobs and be angry at things, but when you really do look at things, when you really look at how things are and examine it critically, you will notice that there's no question that there's still tons of racism everywhere, and myself and Adonis go into it. This is part one of two, like I said, from June 30th, 2020. On the Geekdom101 podcast. Let's start it right now. And welcome back to the Geekdom101 podcast. And joining me all the way from down under in Australia, he is the primary host of Appsolutely Geek'd. Please welcome to the Geekdom101 podcast, Adonis. What's up, man? It's good to have you on. Talk about this very interesting topic. Even though we can talk about a lot of things, and I'm sure we will in the future. I'm sure we'll do more of these, but I'm so happy to talk to you. What's up?
What's going on, bro? I appreciate it, man. Appreciate the platform and the opportunity to talk to you about this, bro.
No, I really appreciate you coming on, man. And for those who don't know, like, sort of the backstory behind this is that, I had known Adonis from doing, like, reaction videos. He invited me on to be a part of his anime tournament on his YouTube channel. We're going to plug that here in a minute. He was doing, like, a tournament-style just debate with, like, One Piece, Naruto, Dragon Ball, Tower. Was Tower of God in the first one? No, it's brand new.
Tower of God was not in with them. Yeah,
it's brand new. Yeah, you did a reaction to it. That's what I saw. I saw you do a reaction to it. Right. Yeah. But several different shows. And then what I did, what happened was after the George Floyd situation, you did a stream about Black Lives Matter, and I watched the entire thing. It was like an hour and 20 minutes. I sat there and watched the entire thing start to finish, and you were on camera. It was a black background, and it was very serious, and it was really powerful, bro. And, like, when I saw that, I was like, this is the guy. Like, this is the guy who I can bring on and talk about it because he's intelligent. He knows what he's talking about. We have similar beliefs and similar values as far as what we want for the world. And I think you'd be great to talk to, but we've already talked before, but not about anything so serious. So, dude, go ahead and plug all your stuff so people can go find you. Go for it now.
Yeah, man, I definitely appreciate it, bro. So for those that are new to me, my name's Adonis Xavier. Appsolutely Geek'd is my YouTube channel. Primarily started out as a tech channel, then kind of went into full geek culture because I'm just a big nerd. I like kind of everything that geek culture has to offer. So we covered quite a bit on there. Some of you had stepped in for the anime tournament, like Geekdom was just talking about. We had him on there. It was a tournament on the best first season of animes, and it was super fun. Geekdom came in, laid the smackdown on Dragon Ball, which was so fire. So I appreciate you coming on.
I appreciate that, man. It was fun.
And then, if you guys want to follow me on Instagram, I do a lot of like geek culture stuff and fashion on there since that's like my other passion. So, and that's at I'm Adonis Xavier. But other than that, yeah, man, like I'm excited to be on here, man. I'm excited to talk about it, bro.
Yes. Thank you for taking time out for sure of your what you're doing today. I know you got a lot of stuff going on later, so I appreciate it. And for those who, just to clarify, Appsolutely Geek'd is GEEK''D.
Yeah. It's spelled weird because it was a tech channel at first, so it's Absolutely, so it's like Absolutely.
Yes.
And I just changed it from Absolutely Tech to Absolutely Geeked, and then kept it moving.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely, and then GEEK apostrophe D. The reason why I'm saying that is I don't want them to type in GEEKED. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
They'll
for
probably still
sure.
find you though. They'll probably still find you. So.
Possibly.
I mean, dude, I know this, man. When I first started doing YouTube back in 2015, my
Mm,
original YouTube name was The Epitome of Geekdom. And
mm.
that was for the first month. And I realized that people couldn't spell the word epitome. Because
That makes sense.
right. So I just shortened it to Geekdom101, and that's where I am now. But it's just funny because the original name was Epitome of Geekdom. And it's funny because I was going to cover tech stuff at that time at one point. I had thought about it.
Mm.
I wanted to do Star Wars, Dragon Ball, Marvel, and I was going to do like DC and tech. And then I kind of realized
Oh
like
wow.
that's too much. It's too much, bro. It's way too much for me, anyways. So, and then the Dragon Ball videos got really great. It got received very well, so I just kind of stuck to that direction. You know what I mean? It's just funny how YouTubers they're like Rhyme Style, for example. He started off
Right.
doing Skyrim's the Bond movie, Skyrim videos, and now he's
Right.
doing Dragon Ball and video games. So you know how it is.
Yeah, it's so crazy. Like that adjustment though is real. I feel like even with me, like when I started doing reaction videos, I kind of got into it by accident, and when I started doing that, like all the SEO changed on my channel. So like my tech videos would get like crazy, reception and all that, and then when the reaction videos started popping off, for whatever reason, the SEO just buried all of my tech stuff. So anytime I would do tech stuff after that, it would just wouldn't perform. And I'm like, wow, this is so interesting. So I actually started creating I haven't started uploading content to it yet, but I started another tech channel just to be tech specific. So I'll move probably technology directly over there. But I'm of the mind of understanding, like not falling in love with, like not romanticizing about what happened already. Like that's what the market and the SEO is switching to. So I'm not going to sit and be like, oh, well, it used to work this way. It doesn't work that way anymore. So I have to just adjust. So that's all good.
Right. No, it's just it takes time to switch things over. You know what I'm saying?
For sure.
But yeah, no, it's one of those things where it's just how it is, man. We might be covering something totally different, in 10 years. Who knows? Who knows? But let's
Sure.
talk about Black Lives Matter. So the George Floyd situation happened. I don't think we have to go through the details of that. I would assume most people watching or listening, that is, probably already
Hmm.
know the situation. I feel like the situation with George Floyd, I think, goes beyond just a black man being killed by a cop. Now, obviously, this has been a problem for many, 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 many years, and it's been something that has always pissed off a lot of people, including myself. This story was sort of like enough is enough, I feel, but I've always taken the perspective of when something like this happens, it doesn't matter what your ethnicity is. You're witnessing a literal crime, and it's crazy because the way the world we live in now, bro, with everybody's got a cell phone, everybody's got a camera. This type
Hmm.
of stuff probably used to happen all throughout the 60s, 70s, 80s, even before then, and there was no evidence of it ever. The cops have probably been this way from decades past, bro, and in other countries. But now that we have social media, news goes out like that, and video, and seeing it, like the way that the guy was sitting there screaming for his mother, telling the guy he can't breathe, and it's almost like the officer just treated him like a roach and just kept stepping on him. And I don't even want to call the guy an officer, bro. Derek Chauvin, bro, he's a piece of shit and a murderer. And I
Right.
feel like if you have any form of human decency inside of your body, you can't in any way think that was okay. No, and people have been saying, like, I've seen some really dumb shit. People were saying that, oh well, George Floyd had a history of crime and all that, dude. It doesn't matter, bro. And it really isn't even the true either way. He didn't deserve to get killed by this cop. And then there's all this rumor
Correct.
about like his like they had a history. But I wanted to, and now I'm recording this a few weeks before it goes out, so we might have more information by the time this goes public. But I
Right.
wanted to ask you how you first saw the video. Obviously, your initial reaction was probably rage, but I'd rather have you tell the story about how you first stumbled upon that.
Yeah. To be honest with you, man, it's it's sad to say, like, it's low key desensitized, right? Like, this has been happening in our communities for centuries, damn near, is what it feels like. Like, you have, blacks being killed by police, by racist whites, lynch mobs, like, you name it. So for us, it's like, we've heard these stories, we were told these stories growing up, we've been experiencing these things since I was a kid. And now it's just to the point where everybody is now seeing it because social media, because people have smartphones, they have cameras. So when I saw this, it was it was just like another one. I was like, wow, but we're still doing this. And it was obviously the initial frustration. And it almost felt like the officers, because they knew they were on camera, especially the gentleman, that the guy that had his knee on his neck. The initial feeling that I got was like he that he didn't care, but it just felt like there was arrogance behind it. And I don't know why it just hit me different. It just hit me different. Yeah, it was so ridiculous. And I live in Australia, so I'm seeing it, over here. And, the initial thing that I'm getting from friends that I know here and that I have here are like, yo, like, is it getting worse in the States? Like, what's going on? And I'm like, no, it's always been this way for us. So
that's the thing. It has. It's in fact, remember 4 years ago where the cop choked out that dude in New York? Do you remember that story?
Eric Garner.
Yes, yeah. Eric Garner. Thank you. Yeah, and I remember that one. This one was worse, I feel, because it's almost like we talked about enough is enough. But and now let me ask you this as to follow up what you said. I recently found out that you're in Australia. I thought you were in the U.S. but you were born and raised in Vegas. So how'd you even end up in Australia? And I just want to say the reason why I'm bringing that up is because just because you're in Australia does not mean, number one, that you're away from racism. That's bullshit. And number two, it doesn't mean that you're, not going to be pissed at this. So how did you even end up there?
Yeah, I was born and raised in Vegas. And I was dancing in the Jabberwocky show in Vegas for a couple years, and they decided we were like there was an opportunity that opened up in Australia to do the show out here. So that was in 2012. So we came here for about 6 months, did the show out here, and I was like, I need to move here. I was like, I need to be in Australia. Like, it was just a mode for me. And as a Black American, feeling what being oppressed feels like, when I came here and some of my guys that came here that are Black came here, we immediately felt like a weight was lifted off our shoulder, like immediately.
Really?
The immediate. There was no danger. There was no anxiety about police. We weren't treated like we were criminals. There was a feeling of relief. It's really weird. And anytime I bring any of my friends from the States over here that are Black are always like, yo, this is different. They're like, it's so weird. Like, there's no danger. It's really interesting. So I went back after the show was done, and I ended up moving to LA for a few years, and then, ultimately got to Australia. But that was kind of like how I got here, how I got exposed to Australia for sure.
Right. Okay. And so now, are you ever planning on coming back?
No, I'm planning on getting my my citizenship here. I'm actually a permanent resident here now. Wow. So I'm applying for citizenship here. So I have a dual citizenship, hopefully in the next couple of years. But my home base will be here in Australia for sure.
Now, I was told a while back that there's actually a lot of racism in Australia as well. I was told that the Aboriginals, which are basically Black people, they're not, there's obviously way different kinds of Black people all over the world. But I've been told there's a lot of racism in Australia also. Have you dealt with any of that since going down there yourself?
Yeah. So the Aboriginals are more similar to the Native Americans of the U.S. So any place that I feel like British colonized, where there was some kind of native people and they wanted the land, they kind of just raped, pillaged, destroyed their stuff and took it. And it was no different here. The Aboriginals, and they were a darker complexion. So, you have that. And, to be honest, when I got here, like, being a visitor in a country or being a new resident in a country, you don't know historical background of things. Like, it's not like you're going through school again. So it's not like you have like the background and history of Australia. And coming from the U.S., we know nothing of any other country but the United States. And even that's very limited to what they want us to learn about the country. So, when we got here, it was, there's things that you're kind of learning on the fly about stuff. And personally, I haven't had any like crazy, like racist encounters. I've had 2 encounters with police officers. Both of them have been incredible. Like, actually, like, it was just really weird. It was shockingly different for me. Now, I think at the same time too, like, they know as soon as I start talking that I'm not from there, so that may also play into how I'm treated, and I don't want to act like that isn't that couldn't be a possibility. But I can't really speak to the racism here because, one, I haven't really experienced it myself, but I am fully aware, especially within the past month or two, about what took place with the Aboriginals, them being slaughtered and kind of isolated into certain parts of the country, some going into slavery. So that stuff is definitely here. I do feel, though, at the same time that as a whole, Australia has taken more steps in acknowledging the fuck ups of their history, though. And what I mean by that is, like, some of the every event I've been to here, whether it be sports event, concert, anything like that, they at the beginning of the event acknowledge the native people of the land.
Okay, fair enough.
And to me, it was interesting because I've never ever heard anything like that in the States, of them acknowledging the native people that were here before us. And it's one of those things where, yeah, it's not like, oh, that makes it okay. It's one of the acknowledgments, though, of acting like this actually happened versus, oh, get over it. You guys took the L, like, and it's different. It's a different feel.
Right.
Now, are they still marginalized? Yes. Are there still things that go on? Yes. And I've been learning a lot more since Black Lives Matter kind of became a world thing. And, there's a protest here an hour north of where I'm living. Is a city called Brisbane. It's one of the largest cities here in Australia.
Right.
And they had 30,000 people for a protest for Black Lives Matter in Australia. 30,000 people showed up for this protest. And a lot of them were fighting not only for Black lives in the United States, but also the Aboriginal community here in Australia.
I never even knew that. I'm glad you're telling that story on here. I had no idea that even happened. I have friends in Australia. I had no idea.
Yeah, there was a protest here. There was one in Melbourne as well. And it's incredible to see, Black lives actually being recognized worldwide. Like, there's some in Paris and UK, and it's going crazy how this megaphone is just really being put on, our experiences.
Wow. I mean, first of all, that's good. I mean, that's a good thing this whole thing has woken a lot of people up. I feel like, I've heard some people say that, oh, does this mean that you didn't care about black folks before then? And that's not the case.
Right.
It's just that enough is enough, because the way I've noticed the news cycle is that something bad will happen, and then people will become outraged, or they'll have an emotional reaction to it. And then, like, they just kind of move on with their lives. That's just kind of how it is in the news cycle. You hear about the Harvey Weinstein situation. You hear about an atrocity, a murder, a suicide, something with celebrity, whatever. You hear about it. It's whatever. With this, though, I think the image of the cop with his knee on George Floyd was so powerful. I think that was maybe the most... I'm gonna be real with you, bro. I feel like, based on what happens out of all of this, I think that image is going to be one image that's going to be ingrained in the brains of people for years to come. It's like, you think about stuff like 9/11, like you see that plane hitting the tower, or you think about stuff like Win Ngoc Loan in Vietnam when he shot the Vietnamese prisoner, and Eddie Adams took the picture and put it all in all the newspapers of him shooting an unarmed prisoner. I think the image of that cop with his knee on George Floyd, I think that's going to be up there, bro. I think
Yeah,
that's. I feel like that. I feel it. I really feel it.
yeah, it was a paradigm shift, and I feel like it was one of those moments though in time where, unfortunately, it was like this lightning in a bottle scenario. And I've talked to some of my friends about this in the past, where there's like this paradox of great things coming out of tragedy. And even Dave Chappelle talks about it in a it wasn't his latest, it was like maybe two specials ago, and he was talking about the whole story of Emmett Till, and
which happened many years ago, and that's still fucked up.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where that scenario, he was supposedly flirted with this girl, and this girl, somebody found out about it, and Emmett Till was black, and this was in a southern state, and he ended up getting basically kidnapped from his house. Like, went in, snatched him from his house, and was murdered. And when his body was found, he was kind of unrecognizable. His mom was like, we're gonna have an open casket because I want them to, I want people to see what they did to him. And that really sparked a huge wave for the civil rights movement and all of that. But the girl that accused him on her deathbed essentially was like, it didn't happen. And the tragic thing is he could have lived his life if she didn't say anything like that, let alone these racist whites come in and kill him because of it. But on the other side of it, what it sparked was massive change. It doesn't seem like massive change right now, and I think a lot of people right now they're only taking snapshots of what they want to see. But things have come a long way, but there's still so much. Like, when you're like, if you're going like out of 100%, like a long way could still be like 20%.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, and that was like the 20% where we are now. So we still about 80% to go. But I feel like this shift right now, because of Corona and all of that, like, you have people were in their house, they were stuck to their phones, they didn't have anything else to do. And it was all over the place. Like, you couldn't even escape it if you wanted to, whether you agreed or disagreed with the scenario or whatever, bandwagon you were jumping on. And I'm not to say that people were bandwagoning in the sense of, trying to hype, be on the hype train, but more so of just whatever side you decided to agree with. You couldn't escape it. It was everywhere. And because people are, boxed up, people are extremely frustrated already because they're, boxed up inside. And it's like, nah. So I feel like it was just this weird lightning in the bottle scenario where you had people already frustrated, the eyes and attention were there, and it was time. And I feel like, to your point, the imagery of that encapsulates multiple generations of what we've experienced as African Americans, as Black Americans, and it's finally awesome to feel like we're not alone in it, because you had so many years of people always making excuses for, there was something, cops don't do that, or they probably didn't obey the officer, or they probably had a weapon on them, or maybe, he didn't follow directions properly, or maybe he took his hands out too fast, or maybe he was reaching for something in the car and he didn't know, or there was always some kind of excuse of what could have happened for the officer to kill the unarmed Black person in whatever scenario. And we've seen too many. I mean, within the last 2 months, there's been like 5 instances of these things. So it's one of those things where it's like, when are we going to stop acting like this isn't?
That's not real.
It's not real. But at the same time,
we're sticking our heads in the ground like an ostrich here. At least people are. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think that's the thing too, where when you're talking about experiences, right? When you have, and I'm coming from a place, when I grew up in suburbia Vegas, right? So, I wasn't around a ton of Black kids when I grew up. So unless I was playing basketball and I would go to the quote unquote West Side, which is actually North Las Vegas, like, I didn't see a lot of Black kids. Like, in my elementary school, I was like, in my class, I was probably 1 or 2 people one or two kids that were black in my elementary school classes.
Wow.
Then going into middle school, it was a very similar scenario. So
did you
in
deal
that
with racism?
side of, oh yeah. So here's the crazy thing though. At the time, you didn't know what it was. I was always like, why do things feel different for me? Right? Because, you know, my dad came from East St. Louis, Chicago, and, you know, that area and that time was
More
very
mixed.
Different.
Yeah.
And then when he came to Vegas, when he was a teenager, to live with his grandmother, Vegas was extremely racist at the time. So, like, extremely. So he had a different perspective of what was going on. For me, being around it and not really understanding what's going on, even though I've had these talks with my dad, you still don't really understand what it is. So a teacher's talking to the classroom, they hear somebody say something, and even though she's talking or he's talking to the class, they're looking directly at me the entire time. Like I did something.
That's wild. Wow.
The entire time though, like not like, you know, scanning the room, just talking like you need to be quiet. And I'm like, I didn't even say anything. So you have that type of stuff. You have, you know, the sports situation where I wasn't getting played, even though I was the better player, where they would just kind of keep me to the side, almost like a token situation is what it felt like. You know, there was these instances where they were present, but they weren't in your face. They weren't calling you anything, but it was just kind of like, oh, we'll put you over here. Or, you know, if there was some kind of scrutiny, they would look at me first. If there was something that was happening in the classroom, or, you know, whether it be in sports or, you know, as a kid walking through a store, not knowing why people are following you through a store, you're very frustrated. Like, why is this happening? Or I'm riding my bike through the neighborhood and a police officer pulls up next to me like, hey, what are you doing here? Like that type of shit. And I'm like, what do you mean what I'm doing here? Like, you know,
racial profiling.
What do you do in this neighborhood? I'm like, I live here. Oh yeah, where do you live? Like what? I'm riding my bike. What are we talking about right now? So it's these situations where, you know, it starts to get annoying. You're like, why? What's going on? You know, and you don't really understand because of where you're living. It's your proximity. So in that situation, you have, you know, white kids that are in that area. They don't know what racism looks like. Because to them, everything is normal. Everything is, there's no, you know, crazy drug stuff going on. There's no gunshots. They don't have people running, you know, they don't get racially profiled by the police. So they don't understand what it means when people are saying that there's racism there, because they don't feel it, or they're not engaging in other races to have this idea of maybe a bias that they might have, you know? So it's really interesting when you get to the point where people are bringing these things up and they're like, well, I've never experienced that. And it's like, yeah, because of where you are in the world, you don't experience it.
Yeah, they don't understand. And the thing is, what people have to understand too is racism is not just people saying the N-word and things like that. Actually, 95% of the time, people who are racist don't even use that word. It's not even that. It's just the way they treat you. And what kind of creeps me out about the whole thing is that sometimes they do it without even realizing they're doing it. Like, it's almost like a subconscious thing. And that's something that needs to be stomped away quickly, I think, in the coming years. Because it's you know, and it's when you grew up and kind of looked back on this, how did you feel? Did you feel angry? Did you feel sad? Did you feel everything combined? Like, when you actually realized, you know, that people were racially profiling you, did you immediately have a reaction to it? Did you want to do something about it? Or was it one of those things where you were just like, whatever, like, it's in the past? Or, like, I'm just curious about how you felt when you actually kind of realized what was going on, you know?
Yeah, I mean, growing up, like, my dad and a lot of African Americans or Black Americans is like this talk of understanding like where you are and how people are going to perceive you, right? And a lot of this stems from, and I know a lot of people hate talking about it, but a lot of this stuff stems from slavery. And people don't think that these things get passed on generation as far as how people look at you and how the media or, you know, in the time, how they portrayed Black people, right? And, you know, you had stuff in constitutions and in in the South, where they were really focused on making sure that blacks were subordinate, that they weren't equal to whites. So through the generations, after slavery gets abolished, in 1863, and people are like, oh, that's not that far off. I just wanted you to understand, 1863 was when it was done, the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863. So when that ended, people were like, oh, well, you guys are free now. But it wasn't that, right? So like you had African Americans, which essentially were the cornerstone of the Southern economic boom, are now free. So you have the Southerners that no longer have this free labor. The economy's tanking. All these blacks end up going further west into Oklahoma, Texas, and they start creating these towns or communities and towns that actually are starting to build wealth, owning businesses, land, and you have these racist mobs come in of racist whites and literally destroy the towns, destroy the buildings, like. And there's tons of these things. There was something, I think it was called the Black Summer, the Red Summer, where they literally, I think it was like 1919, where they come in and they just slaughtered towns of blacks that we built. So what happens when you have people come in, and at the same time as well, the prison systems are starting to develop, and the laws about you're a citizen unless you have rights as a citizen unless you're incarcerated. So they were arresting blacks at a ridiculous, alarming rate for petty crimes,
to take
like
away
stealing,
their rights.
To take away their rights, to put them back in labor for free. So you're talking about all this stuff that started in the 1860s, 1870s, and then going into the whole segregation, Jim Crow, all of this stuff. Like, this is not old shit. You know what I'm saying? Some of these things happened in the early 1900s. So
which wasn't that long ago, basically.
It wasn't. So when you have
not that long ago. Yeah.
Exactly. So you have wealth that wasn't able to develop, right? You have land that we couldn't even pass on because it got stolen from us. So we have ownership of property, of businesses that got burned from us, and then things like Central Park. Central Park was a black owned town. That was a black community that was built. And then they took it from us, you know what I'm saying, to make a park. So it's like, when people are talking about they don't understand systemic racism, there's things that have been in place to take the ability for us to build wealth, to have ownership of things, to pass on to generation, to start learning things. Like the idea of, white wealth and having businesses and land that go back towards slavery. Like, we don't know our last names. We don't know our heritage. We were robbed of those things, So the things that we learn, the things that we've seen, we learned from our slave masters. We learned Christianity from our slave owners. Like, we were taught all these things to be, quote unquote, American from the people that stole us from our land. So like the idea of, oh, well, it's a while ago, it doesn't affect the now. It does affect the now, because these are things and ideals that have been passed on generation to generation, whether it be wealth in the white community, whether it be, the idea of what blacks are, I'm saying, oh, well, they're criminals. So we have to arrest them. So let's, make them look a certain way to make it seem like we're a threat to society, to make it seem like we're dangerous because they're upset that their labor is gone.
It's mind blowing. Go ahead. I'm sorry. Continue.
No, it's all good. So I mean, that being perpetuated into media, movies portraying blacks as animals, as savages, going into cartoons where we're drawn with disproportionately large noses in super dark skin with light lips. It's ridiculous how long it had been going on for, to make us look like we weren't human. To make it seem like there were this angry mob of uncivilized people, and it's been passed on generation to generation. So the ideas of that, they go all the way back to when we were brought here.
No, and actually, I feel they go even further back than that, because when you look at the history, because there's actually a lot of history that, and this is one thing I do want to delve into here is with you, is because I think it's the systematic racism is very real, and the thing that people have to understand is that it's also very covert. In other
Right.
words, when we grow up, when we go through the school system, when we grow up and just kind of live our lives as kids, teenagers, and young adults,
Right.
we don't really notice it right away, but it's definitely there. And the older you get, when you open up that third eye, is when you really pick up on some of this covert racism that's still very prevalent. For example, white imperialism, and just to real quick clarify this. This is not Adonis and I. I'm Latino. I'm Hispanic. I'm part Spaniard, part black. 1/8 black, 7/8 Spaniard, from what I understand, based on my grandma and all that in Cuba. This is not like a thing against white people. We're talking about
Correct.
white empires. We're not talking about white individual Caucasian people. But this
Correct.
is historical fact. They
Correct.
have always, it did to the Native Americans, bro. They came and took their land. And it brought them disease. This is like a common thing when it comes to white imperialism. But even before the United States even founded, if you study the history of the continent of Africa, there's so much beauty in that continent. And what blows my mind is I started learning about this type of stuff after I graduated high school, after I wasn't even in college. I learned about things like the Moors and how there were these beautiful Moor castles all throughout Spain, all throughout Italy. And then in Africa, there were these African kingdoms with these black kings that, the continent of Africa has an incredible history of black imperialism and not in a racist way, but it was, black empires and wealth and all these different things. And we never learn any of this fucking shit in school. None of it. When I took world history, it was all about a little bit about Egypt, and it was all about World War One and World War Two and Hitler and
Right.
Then for U.S. history, it was more about that plus the Vietnam War, and all that stuff is interesting. Don't get me wrong, but not at one time did any of our teachers, because it's not in the curriculum. The white written curriculum, by the way, did they ever go through the history of the continent of Africa and how at one time it was the Caucasoids that were kind of not so much the minority, but I don't want to use the word Caucasoid because some people take it the wrong way, but the Caucasian people that they, from the Caucasus Mountains, that at one time it was very different. The world was very different, but nobody ever talks about that ever. It's rarely talked about. And even to this day, you've got, like you said, blacks being arrested for petty crimes, being put in prison or in jail for stuff like selling marijuana, which should be legal, things like this that are just pointless, dumb crimes. And you've got mostly white attorneys, white judges, the legal system is white. And you have a systematic racism because obviously not every person in power is white. That's a myth. But there's enough white racists, and this is the same thing with cops. Not every cop is bad. In fact, I would say most cops are actually good people. But there's enough bad ones. There's enough of a pool of bad ones that it's a problem. You know what I mean? Let's say we got 10,000 cops, and let's say that 500 of them are racist. Yeah, the 10,000 are good, but the 500 are causing real problems, not just for black people and other minorities, but for other cops. Because now, because of the George Floyd situation, there's people who are being very militant about this, who are now saying, defund the cops, get rid of police departments. And I think that's a huge mistake because we have real criminals out there. We've got pedophiles. We've got, murderers that need to be put away. They need to be fucking put away. And you can't get rid of cops. We need cops. But we have to figure out a way, and John Walsh talked about this last week on the episode, 2 weeks ago on the podcast, whenever it was. We have to find a way to enforce these hate crime laws to where if a cop is racist, he needs to pay. If there's enough evidence to prove that a cop does something wrong, it should be double or triple what the rest of us civilians get because he's a cop. He should be aware of what's right and wrong. And I feel like we need to weed out these racists, but the problem is that when you've got lawmakers who are also white, and a lot of them do have their own agenda, and some of it's not even so much racist as far as anti-black. Some of it is more so they want to retain their own power. See, that's the other thing about racism people have to understand. It's not that these racists necessarily hate black people. It's that they don't want black people to infiltrate or they don't want to give up their power to a black person or to a Hispanic or to whatever.
Right.
So, and it's been this way for not hundreds, brother, thousands, I feel, years at this point. Now, I don't have the entire timeline of the history of the world in front of me, but it's a very real thing.
Yeah, and I feel like to your point, like when it comes to like the systemic stuff, you know, and I know people are like, oh, well, you know, blacks have the same opportunities as white
myth.
People.
That is a myth.
And I'll kind of give it to you like this. So, you know, when they started zoning areas to essentially keep blacks in a certain area of town, they did things. It's a practice called redlining. So what would happen is you would have the city council or whatever mark out an area in the city where they want the blacks to live, right? So they're like, all right, cool. We want them to be here. And what they would do is have
it's a form of segregation, brother.
It's exactly what it is. So they're like, look, we're going to have the banks and stuff deny them loans for businesses, for homes, and all this in these other areas. You're not going to be able to rent in these areas, and we're going to kind of force them into these certain areas. Now, also because of that, school systems are based on, their funding is based on land value in the area. So if in that area, all it's zoned for is liquor stores, gun stores, all this other nonsense on top of these low income housing, the land value is low. So the schools don't get the funding the same. The schools there are funded by land value. So yeah, you have these other high end schools because the land value around them are higher. So the idea of equal opportunity doesn't exist. And I think that's the thing where a lot of people just, they don't know. And I know a lot of us as African Americans and even minorities that feel these types of, the systemic problems and racism is, we're like, bro, this has been happening for so long. But at the same time, everybody right now is a victim of the system. What does that mean? What it means is these systems predate any of us in our generation that are alive.
These things have been like many generations, brother. You know what I'm saying?
So when I'm speaking about this and when other people are speaking about bringing awareness, it isn't to say, how can you guys not know this? None of us were taught this in school. None of us were taught this. When they talk about U.S. history, they only focus on the wins, the great moments. Yep. And then for the 1 month of the year, they talk about quote unquote black history, like it only applies to us. It doesn't apply to the United States. And they're like, okay, this was slavery. Then we had Jim Crow, and then Martin Luther King saved the day. That's essentially what took place during Black History Month.
I just want to say real quick, I don't want to interrupt you, but MLK is like the one guy they always talk about. There have been so many important black people in the history of the world, and yet MLK is the one that only... Now, I'm not trying to disregard what he did, but there are so many other black people that did important things for the world, and yet MLK gets like the most... It's like 99% MLK when they teach you about the history of blacks.
It's so crazy, and I think one of those things, too, because we're like, oh, well, you guys have Black History Month. It's like, that's again... That's
the problem.
Is that in and of itself is one of those things where it's like when you were talking about that covertness, it's like, oh well, we'll give you a month to talk about your problems, and it's like, bro, like this is history to America,
right? To the world in some cases.
In the same way that you guys try to make things pretty about Columbus and the Pilgrims and the Indians and Thanksgiving and
bullshit.
Like bro, like you guys paint this to make it look like this was like this, unified agreement when you okey doke them, and it's so crazy. So this scenario is a very similar one where people right now have no concept of what systems are in place that they benefit from. So for me, it's and I've been trying to tell people that are in the Black Lives Matter movement, like you want to try to exercise patience with people because of the fact that they don't know. Yeah. What they don't know.
They're not all black. I'm sorry. They're not all bad people that hate black people. Some just don't know. Like you said, some are very young too, man. We got some really young dudes out here who are angry at whites, and there's nothing wrong with being angry at racism and all that. But sometimes even the young white people, like some of our peers, right? Other YouTubers, they don't even know. They don't even know what's going on. They just live their life. They have no idea.
I know people that are my age. Just so you guys are aware, I'm 32 years old. So. People for me, my age, there's a lot of them that have no concept of the stuff that is going on or have been going on in the system. And luckily for me, my dad had all types of literature growing up on Black history, black stories on, towns and what the slave trade looked like, and all these things through history. So I had a broader grasp of what was going on and what had taken place. So when I'm in school and we're talking about Black history and none of these things are being brought up, I always felt like we got the short end of the stick. It's like, why aren't you guys talking about how the white Americans at the time made us look a certain way, made us feel a certain way, to a point where society accepted what was told to them, in the same way now where people are pointing out, the fake news. You know what I'm saying? That's not a new thing, even though, Trump kind of coined the term.
Yeah,
but
it's not new at all, bro. At all.
That idea of media skewing things for whatever, political gain or cultural gain, that's been going on forever.
For sure. No, and it's interesting because we always hear about like MLK and Abraham Lincoln and all this stuff, but why do we not hear about all the Black scientists that have developed medicine throughout the years?
Right.
There's various forms of technology that have been invented or at least developed by Black people. It's almost like it's just, Bill Gates and Steve Jobs. And yeah, they are important. Don't get me wrong. I'm not taking anything away from those guys, but it's always like kind of swept under the rug, and a lot of it is very systematic from people like, who are kind of in the shadows. I'm not talking about conspiracy theories or anything like that.
Right.
But I'm saying it is systematic because you never, like we talked about, you never really hear about it. I mean, we were talking about it earlier before we started recording about how even the media and the pop culture sphere is very, very covertly racist. And I picked up on this about 10 years ago, how right now we've got like whenever there's a famous Black person, a LeBron James, Michael Jordan, it's usually either an athlete or somebody who is an actor, or like you said earlier, a song and dance person. It's usually an entertainer, a comedian, like Kevin Hart, Chris Rock. And like The Rock, who's part Black, part Samoan. Like, you've got several Black entertainers who are making a lot of money, and they're using that money to give it back to the Black communities. Now, that's good. What Will Smith and Kanye West, look, I don't even like Kanye, but what he did recently for George Floyd's family is a great thing. So we got to give him props on that. Like, there's a lot of entertainers that have done well, but why is it that the only Black scientist that ever gets any love is Neil deGrasse Tyson? There's one. Neil deGrasse. There's so many Black scientists out there, Black astrologers, Black, researchers, and it's only Neil deGrasse Tyson who gets the pop culture love. It's always him.
This is another thing that, my dad was always trying to instill in me growing up. And, it's one of those things, again, back to those talks that we would have, that a lot of Blacks have with their kids, whether it be the police talk, whether it be, the racism talk. But the idea that when you're going to have to work twice as hard, maybe 3 times as hard just to get noticed. And the other side of it was, they're expecting us to be singing dance types, entertain us.
Athletes, basketball players, football players. Yeah. And it's crazy because like you mentioned about Black History Month, right? It's like, okay, I feel like what they're saying is, okay, we're going to give you 1 month. Let's give you Neil deGrasse Tyson. Let's give you one. Like, you're going to get one. You're going to get one. Right. You're Condoleezza Rice. You're going to get one strong Black politician, maybe 2. You're going to get one, and of course there's more. Colin Powell. I mean, there's a lot more, but like, you're not going to get the abundance as much as you would whites. Now, obviously, there's more whites in this country than Blacks, but, I also feel like at the same time, like, it seems obvious to me, and I'm glad we're talking about this because I've always felt like I was going crazy. I thought maybe it was in my own head, and the problem is that I realized that I'm not the only one. There's tons of other Hispanics and Blacks who think it's in their own head, like, oh, well, this can't be true. I mean, like, you notice it, but you're thinking you're crazy. You think you're crazy, and they gaslight you too, like, no. You have 1 month because we want to show love for you guys. Like, they gaslight your motherfucking ass when it's bullshit, bro. Like, no, like, wait a minute, hold on. This is bullshit right now, and you notice it. I'm sorry, you were gonna say.
No, I agree with you. It's one of those things where you get like the covertness is like the backhanded compliments.
Right.
Oh, you don't sound Black.
Dude, I can't stand that.
Okay.
No, same
Like,
thing. It's not just you guys, too. It's not just the black people, man. We get it too, bro.
yeah.
The Latinos, bro. My friend Danny Fernandez went to go try out for a role.
Yo, I know Danny.
Yes.
She's the homie. Yeah.
I love Danny. And do you know the story about how the casting producer was like, you should act more Mexican? And she's like, what do you mean act more Mexican? Do I gotta wear a sombrero and you know, like, do we have to behave like the stereotype?
Danny keeps it a buck all the time. All the time. I love her for that. She just doesn't. She's like, I'm gonna say exactly how I feel. So I respect her.
But you know what I'm saying? Like, we all deal with it. And the reason why this is an important topic to me, man, is because even though I don't have, like I said, I'm mixed. I'm mostly white, Spaniard from my mom's side. I don't consider myself white. I consider myself Latino because I am literally from Cuba. I'm part black, but what people have to understand about me is I came here, bro. I wasn't even born here. I had no privilege. My dad worked, 18 hours a day sometimes, not every day, but some days he'll work 8-10 hours a day. My mom was a stay-at-home mom. Like, dude, I did not get my college paid for by my parents. I didn't get an inheritance when they died. I didn't get anything like that, bro. We had no life insurance. And I was able to build my business after going through hell. I was able to build my business and become a business owner. And I want other people listening to this, bro, whether you're black, whether you're Hispanic, or even if you're white or Asian, whatever, to take inspiration from that and say, you know what, like, the system is made for us to fail, but we can succeed. But the reality is, here's the sad truth, is that because I have lighter skin than other people, I may have gotten an easier break, and that's bullshit. That is bullshit, bro. That is, and I've dealt with racism also. When people find out that I'm Hispanic, it's happened two times. It's happened two times to me at two different jobs. And I've had a boss who just happens to be a redneck racist. Now, again, it's two different jobs, two different people, but they both happen to be white rednecks. That's what they were. Sorry, but it's the truth. And when they found out I was Hispanic by listening to me speak Spanish, all of a sudden they treated me differently. And at first, and you and I talked about it, bro, just like when you were younger. That's why I can relate to you, bro. That's why I can relate to black people. I had mostly black friends in high school anyways because I was really into hip hop. I went to an urban high school. Like, we all kind of vibed on that, Right. But we also got along for this reason. So they find out you're Hispanic, and all of a sudden I'm starting to do the menial work. I'm getting less work. I'm getting worse work. I'm getting harder work than I did just a week ago when you thought I was a Caucasoid. So it's like, that's kind of bullshit, bro. That's kind of bullshit. Like, that's real racism right there. They never called me a racial slur, a rafter, a spick, or whatever racial slur you want to come up with for a Spanish person or a Cuban. They never called me that. A Desi Arnaz. Never, but it was legit. And at first, like we talked about, bro, at first you don't think it's real. You're like, okay, well, maybe it's just a coincidence. Maybe they're having a bad week. But when it happens week after week after week, and you notice that you pinpoint the single moment as to when they turned on you is when they found out you were Hispanic, that's racism. And it's the same thing. So I can relate to a lot of my black friends when they talk about, like, them being racially profiled, because it's fucking bullshit. And I got breaks, but I didn't get as many breaks as I would have if I was white. Same thing with, the reverse, where I feel like if I had darker skin, maybe it would have been harder for me. Now, I don't know that because we don't know. Like, there's so many different variables here. We don't know how life would have been if I had, because if I was raised like in Louisiana or in Atlanta that has a high black population, maybe I would have done something else in my life. I don't know. But it's also one of those things where, like, it's very real, dude. Like, this is not a myth. Like, I thought it was a myth. I swear to you, Adonis, bro. I thought for a long time, like, it's just in my own head, bro. I'm paranoid. But it's not, bro. It's actually the system itself will push you down.
It was, with that being said, like, that's why my name is what it is. So my mom loved the Greek mythology, like, loved it. And my dad was like, I want to give him as many opportunities as possible. So I want to make sure his name isn't a traditional black sounding name. Right. So because at the time, applications, you filled them out, and people went in. And so if you fill out an application and that person that took your application, wasn't the person you were interviewing with, and they saw on the paper, oh, Adonis, that sounds cool. I get in there. You don't know how many times I applied for a job. I go into the interview and they look at me surprised. Like they're like, oh, hi, and you are? I'm like, I'm Adonis. I'm here for my interview. And they're like, oh, you're Adonis. Okay. Yeah. And so they're like now caught off guard. And then
It's such bullshit, bro. It's such
how many
bullshit.
times, bro, I had them say, we do think you're probably overqualified. So we're
yeah,
gonna
but I
have
gotta
to
eat too.
And I was like, so then you should be getting a lot more for the pay then, correct? And they're to be like, oh, well, we just, we don't think you're going to be a good fit. And now I don't know how many times I had heard that as a teenager trying to apply for jobs in Vegas, right? And running into those things early on as a young adult, like you're like, wow, like that was my first real taste of it when it came to like opportunity. And it always came back to, people are like, oh, well, some of the most popular people in the world are black. And it's like, yeah, but these are like, you're talking about extremely exceptional. I'm just talking about the average person to average person.
Right.
What are those opportunities, right? I'm not talking about, okay, we have this primarily white dominantly owned industry, like the music industry, right? And we're going to be selling music to certain genres, to certain demographics of people. So we need to make sure we have music that we can sell to Black Americans. You know what I'm saying? Like blacks weren't owning labels. They didn't own distribution companies. Like what are we talking about?
That was a recent thing. That was like the 90s when that started. Okay, with that said, we're going to go ahead and end part 1 right there. Part 2 next week. Like I said, Adonis is perfect for this show. He's not one of these like, I hate white people, dudes, because that's just not what this is about. You know what I mean? That if you want to just go down that road, dude, save it for something else, bro. You're not going to get that here. This is going to be a solid, real discussion about the real problems and making people aware of how things are in the real world and making people aware of this sort of problem that we have, which we delve into in the second part a lot more as well. We're going to talk about hip hop and things like that. But the idea is not to get people angry so that they commit crimes. The idea is to get you to understand that racism and covert racism and systematic racism is still a very real thing, and that if you are somebody who has been racially profiled, that you're not going crazy. Don't let them gaslight you, number one. And number two, it's also to get you motivated to go out there and overcome this, which can be difficult sometimes, but it's not impossible. And I think if we work together and if we work hard, we can do it. So anyways, that's it for part 1. I hope you enjoyed it. Part 2 next week. Geekdom101.libsyn.com. I love you all, and I will talk to you next week for part 2 of my discussion on Black Lives Matter with Adonis. See you then.